Keto and crime, keto and crime. We uncover the grime on keto and crime. Keto and crime, keto and crime. Now is the time for keto and crime.
Hey everyone, welcome to Keto and Crime. Well, it has been a week of sentences, not necessarily court cases, but sentences, with two major sentences and two major trials coming down in the last 2 weeks. The most recent one was the three men convicted of killing Ahmaud Arbery back in 2020. Travis McMichael, the one that fired the fatal shot, his father, Gregory McMichael, who was a former investigator for the local suburb county sheriff's prosecutor's office, and their neighbor, William Roddie Bryan, were found guilty just before Thanksgiving of fatally shooting and murdering Ahmaud Arbery. They were found guilty of several counts of premeditated murder as well as murder uh, in the while committing another felony, capital murder, um, during that time because of other things that they did, such as false imprisonment, such as um, violation of his civil rights, of Ahmaud Arbery's civil rights, that sort of thing. Now, from what I've further researched, what I've been told, talking to some attorney friends, that does not necessarily mean they will face a sentence on each one of those. It appears that the charges of capital murder are just kind of riders in a way, just to let them know that they have looked at every single one of the charges and agreed that a murder was committed while this other charge was being committed, if that makes sense. So it's not necessarily that they will face sentences on all those capital murder charges. But as far as the initial murder charge, that carries a minimum life sentence in the state of Georgia. Now, what the judge was trying to decide is whether or not they would be eligible for parole. And that is actually what came down today. And in the case of the McMichaels, Travis, the shooter, sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His father, Gregory McMichael, who was seen on the film helping to kind of, you know, herd Ahmaud Arbery as well, uh, was also sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Their neighbor, William Roddie Bryan, was also sentenced to life in prison, but with the eligibility of parole after serving at least 30 years. Now, with the ages of Mr. Bryan, with Roddie having 30 years to serve, it's pretty much taking him very much into his elderly years. I suspect he will appeal. Of all the defendants in this trial, he was the one that I thought was the most ambiguous. Yes, it could have been that he was filming that for some sort of sick amusement, but I think he was filming it because they actually believed that they were doing the right thing, and he was filming it to get them off, and unfortunately it had the opposite effect. So I don't think, if we break it down, I don't think he had the same culpability in the murder of Ahmaud Arbery as the other two, and I think he will appeal it, and I think he'll be successful on his appeal, honestly. As for the other two, when the eligibility for Georgia's self-defense and citizens arrest law was thrown out, then their whole case just collapsed, and I don't know if they'll fare much better on appeal unless their attorneys can charge it on the basis that the judge in this trial basically instructed the jury to disregard that law, essentially setting it up for a verdict. There was an instance where the judge basically told the jury that by his interpretation of the citizen's arrest law, that it did not apply in this case. And the defense attorney actually argued with him, saying, "You've just lost the case for my client. You've just basically instructed the jury to find my client guilty." Now, I think if they do appeal, that they will probably go about it from that their client's civil liberties, constitutional rights were violated by the judge doing that. And if that's the case, and if they can prove it, because it is on film, they might be able to get this conviction overturned. I'm not 100% confident in that, but I think that's their best route, to be quite honest. So that's the first of the major trials that were settled out in the last 2 weeks. What's the second? This is one that I did not actually cover the trial itself, but I did cover the case very, very in-depth terms, and I'll link that video right up here. But this is the case of Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. Now, if you'll remember, in the early 2000s, the tech boom was everywhere. Pets.com was the thing. And among many of the companies that came out of this whole tech bubble rush of the early 2000s, we're talking 2000, actually late 90s, really, to mid 2000s, like 2015, 16, Theranos was the darling of Silicon Valley. It completely collapsed in 2018, but before it did, it had garnered billions of dollars in venture capital and investments, making it one of the powerhouses of all of Silicon Valley. But basically what Theranos was, and as I said, I did a very in-depth video. I'll link it right up here. Highly recommend you check that out. Holmes, was very much interested in the medical field. She had had some blood testing as a young girl, and it scared her, and she wondered if there was a way to make blood testing easier for people, such as, when you have blood tests, you sometimes have to have a variety of different draws, some from your fingertips, some from veins, some from different parts of your body, often a whole vial of blood, which can mean if you have 5 tests, they're taking quite a bit of blood from you because they can only run tests on one vial. So, her idea was to come up with something that could take 1 drop of blood from a finger prick and test for nearly everything. And that was her dream, and that's what Theranos was based on. Her dream of the Edison box, which could take a drop of blood and perform nearly every single blood test that you would ever need performed from that single drop of blood, and that was her whole thing. And people were all in favor of this. She had huge proponents all over Silicon Valley, all throughout the medical industry, even up to the highest forms of government. She had supporters that were in former presidential administrations backing her on this, and she was able to carry on a huge fraud for several years because the box just plain didn't work. In fact, what happened was they would set up contracts with the walk-in clinics that you see at Walgreens. That was her whole premise, to partner with these little one-stop shop clinics in retail outlets, or even, some doc-in-the-boxes, urgent care clinics, so that you could walk in with orders from a doctor to get a blood test or have medical tests or have medical exam there and get the blood test. And then they would be able to take that from 1 drop of blood. But what was happening, because the technology didn't work, instead of a Silicon Valley mecca where it was just computer engineers and other facets of a corporate headquarters in there, it was actually a huge lab, because didn't work. So when people would go in thinking they were just going to get this finger prick and it was going to be put into this Edison machine, it would read all this. Instead, what was happening, the people at the clinics were taking full vials of blood, getting them to sign a waiver, and sending it to Theranos, where this huge lab full of lab techs instead of computer techs would test it and then send the results back. And they weren't even doing that testing right. There was a lot of false positives, false negatives, a lot of lawsuits still out there. Some have been settled, some are still pending, based on on the lies that were told at Theranos. Elizabeth Holmes had a fascination with Steve Jobs ever since she founded the company at the age of 19. She always wore black turtlenecks. She even made her voice deeper, like you would hear in different interviews. You would hear the inflection of her voice change from normal feminine voice to a very deep, almost masculine type voice. And she was very much wanted to be this next tech guru, and she operated her whole business like that, from what employees that testified. And one reporter actually is the one that brought it down. We'll get to that. She ran it kind of like a feudal system where no one spoke. Her and her former fiance, Ramesh Sunny Balwani, who was her second in command, ran it like that. If you were a dissenter, you were cast out, you were fired immediately. But anyway, she had fooled all these people into donating hundreds of millions of dollars over the few years that it was in existence. It had, you know, captured billions of dollars. We're talking Rupert Murdoch. We're talking the owners of Walmart. We're talking Walgreens itself put a huge investment because they were going to be exclusively partnered with Walgreens for a while. So basically, all this stuff was going down, and you had all these employees that were being let go that decided they were going to blow the whistle. And you had one very snoopy reporter, John Carreyrou of the New York Times, who did an in-depth expose and ended up writing the novel, the book, Bad Blood, which I read for my coverage of that case. Again, linked up there. Um, who basically blew the whole lid off of it. And as a result, the company went under in 2018. And this criminal trial was launched, as well as many, many, many civil lawsuits. I mean, the reason I didn't cover this trial, it went on for 4 months in San Jose, and it's not even over. Balwani, who was her second in command, whom she tried to kind of throw under the bus by saying that he was, SAing her and kept her under his boot. He was responsible for all that. So his trial's coming up in February. So that's going to be another one. But that trial went on. Lots of people testified, and she was found guilty on 4 counts. After 4 months of trial, the jury deliberated for 50 hours. It was a jury of 8 men and 4 women. Found her guilty of 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud for lying to investors about the Edison machine. There were 4 other fraud-related charges she was not found guilty of that all kind of mirrored that, but they did not evidently have enough evidence to convict her on the other 4 counts. So she's found guilty on the wire fraud. So she's going to be spending probably a significant amount of time in jail unless she has the money to get herself out of it. We all know how that works. But her sentencing is coming up. The jury, though, was not unanimous on 3 of the other fraud-related accounts, including straight-up investor fraud. So it is possible, because this was a federal trial, that she could be tried again, because only the federal government can do that. Think about that. But anyway, she could be tried again. But she's going to be spending double-digit years in prison unless something else happens. Unless something comes out in Barani's trial or something, she's going to be spending a lot of time in prison. Maximum is 20 years. I suspect she'll get much less than that. After the verdict was read, she did leave on her own recognizance. They don't consider her a bail jumping threat, I suppose, and she is at home with her family until a sentencing date is set. Now, there's no telling how long that will take, but that is the outcome, facing up to 20 years. Sort of got punished for her malfeasance, but remains to be seen until the sentence is handed down. So, I thought you'd enjoy it. I certainly hope you have had a great week. I have a great true crime case coming out for you tomorrow. It is the case of the Kirkwood Rampage shooting. I think you're going to enjoy it. I also have a great week coming up with both starting of my serial killer series as well as my mad medical experiments, and that will include the Minnesota starvation experiment, the Tuskegee experiment, and eventually the crimes of Dr. Joseph Mengele, the mad Nazi doctor. So, going to be a lot of great stuff coming up. I also hope you will join me Monday afternoon for my live stream, as we will be discussing the updates in the Delphi murder trials. Delphi murder case. Interesting development in that, and instead of making a video about it, I'm going to discuss it live with you on air Monday afternoon at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. So be looking out for that. It was originally scheduled for today, but unfortunately, due to family commitments, I can't do that, but it will be Monday, and I hope you'll join me for that. And with that being said, I hope you have a great weekend. We got snow, which is why I'm all bundled up. We got about 5 inches of snow. So here in Tennessee, we go from uh, cold to hot and muggy to tornadoes to rainy to snow, and it'll be probably warm again next week. So that's how we roll here in Tennessee. But in any case, I hope you had a great week. I will see you soon, and until next time, keto and crime. Ow.